Imagine being a British officer. You have a revolver on your hip. You have the law on your side. But you are currently surrounded by 5,000 women who are singing a song about your death. You can't shoot them. That would start a war. You can't run. They are blocking the exits. You are being sat on. And in 1929, this psychological weapon was more effective than any bomb. November 23rd, 1929, Oloko, Eastern Nigeria. The heat hangs heavy over the compound. Nwanyeruwa is counting her goats when she sees him coming down the red dirt path. A man in khaki shorts and a white colonial helmet, carrying a notebook and the weight of British authority. His name is Mark Emerua. He is a census taker, a puppet of the empire, and today he's been sent to count her livestock. Not for her benefit, for taxes. Nwanyeruwa is a widow. She survived her husband's death, raised her children alone, and built her small trade business selling palm oil in the local markets. She knows what this count means. The British are coming for her money, for the little she has left. How many goats do you have? Emerua demands, not asks. She looks at him. Why do you need to know? The government requires it. The government, she spits the word like poison. Your government has already taken everything from us. My husband paid taxes. The chiefs collect taxes. Now you want to tax my goats, my children's food? Emerua steps closer, his voice rising. You will answer, or I will. Or you'll what? What happens next will echo across southeastern Nigeria like thunder before a storm. Emerua grabs her by the throat. He threatens to beat her. He tells her she has no choice, no voice, no power. He is the representative of an empire that rules a quarter of the world's surface. She is just a village woman. But he's forgotten something crucial. In Igbo society, women aren't powerless. They are the backbone of the economy. They control the markets. They feed entire communities. And when you attack one woman, you attack them all. Nwanyeruwa doesn't cry. She doesn't submit. She runs. But not away. She runs toward something. She runs to the compound of a woman named Ekonya, and together they begin cutting palm fronds from the trees. These aren't decorations. In their culture, palm fronds are a declaration of war, a signal that spreads faster than telegraph wires ever could. Within hours, women in surrounding villages receive the call. The fronds are passed from hand to hand, village to village, like a chain of fire across the forest. Each woman who receives one knows exactly what it means. Gather, we fight back, now. By the next morning, something is building that the British Empire never saw coming. Not an army with guns, not a rebellion led by men in uniform, but thousands of women armed with nothing but their voices, their bodies, and a centuries-old protest tradition the British can't begin to understand. They call it sitting on a man, and within days it will bring the entire colonial administration to its knees. Because here's what the British didn't know about the women of southeastern Nigeria. They had been preparing for this moment their entire lives. Their grandmothers had passed down the tactics. Their mothers had taught them the songs. Every woman in every village knew the ritual by heart. When a man abused his power, when a chief grew corrupt, when a husband beat his wife beyond reason, when an elder betrayed the community, the women would gather. They would surround his compound. They would dance. They would sing songs that mocked his manhood, his lineage, his worth. They would bang on his walls until sleep became impossible. They would follow him wherever he went, a chorus of judgment he couldn't escape. And if he still refused to yield, if he clung to his power and his pride, they would strip naked. In Igbo culture, this wasn't just shocking, it was devastating. A married woman exposing herself to a man who wasn't her husband was considered a curse so powerful it could destroy his social standing forever. His ancestors would turn away from him. His children would bear the shame. The earth itself would reject him. The British called it primitive. They called it barbaric. They called it uncivilized. They had no idea it was about to break them. December 1929. The British Colonial Office, Owerri Province. Captain John Cook sits behind his mahogany desk, reading reports that make no sense to him. Thousands of women are gathering at native court buildings across the province. They're not looting. They're not burning farms. They're just there, sitting, singing, refusing to leave. His deputy, a junior officer named Thompson, stands nervously by the window. "How many?" Cook asks. "At least 10,000, sir. Maybe more. They're coming from everywhere. Villages we didn't even know existed." Cook lights his pipe. He's been in Nigeria for 6 years. He's dealt with tribal disputes, land conflicts, minor skirmishes. But he's never seen anything like this. Women don't organize. Women don't protest. That's not how the empire works. What do they want? They're demanding we remove the warrant chiefs. They say the chiefs are corrupt, stealing from the markets, taking bribes, and sir, they're saying we plan to tax them. Cook waves his hand dismissively. "We're not taxing women. That's absurd. Who told them that?" "The incident in Oloko, sir. The census taker and the widow." "One incident? This is about one incident." But Thompson knows it's not about one incident. None of them understand that yet. This isn't about Nwanyerua's goats or Emerua's aggression. This is about 30 years of accumulated rage. 30 years of watching their society dismantled piece by piece. Let me take you back for a moment. Let you understand what the British had done. Before 1900, the Igbo people didn't have kings or emperors or centralized rulers. Their society was decentralized, democratic in ways the British couldn't comprehend. Decisions were made by councils of elders. Women had their own governing structures, powerful market unions that regulated trade, settled disputes, and protected their economic interests. Then the British arrived and decided this system was primitive. They needed someone to give orders to, someone to collect taxes through, someone to blame when things went wrong. So they invented the warrant chiefs, men who were given certificates of authority by the colonial government, men who often had no traditional right to rule, men who quickly learned that their power came from pleasing their British masters, not their own people. These chiefs became tyrants. They took bribes to settle court cases. They seized land. They demanded gifts from market women, a basket of yams here, a percentage of palm oil profits there. The British called it indirect rule. The Igbo called it theft with paperwork. And the women watched their economic power erode. Their market councils were ignored. Their voices were excluded from the native courts. They were told to be silent, to be obedient, to let men handle politics. But here's what the British never understood. Igbo women had always been political. They controlled the food supply. They managed the trade networks. They decided which crops to plant and which markets to supply. In a subsistence economy, that wasn't just economic power, it was the power of life and death. So when the rumor spread that the British planned to tax women, to directly attack their already diminishing income, it wasn't just an economic threat, it was an existential one. And the women had been ready for this moment for a very long time. By December 10th, the protests had spread to over 20 native court stations. Women weren't just sitting anymore. They were tearing down buildings. They were releasing prisoners from the colonial jails. They were burning the court warrant books, the symbols of British legal authority going up in flames. At Owerri, more than 10,000 women surrounded the native court. They sang through the night. The songs weren't random. Each one had meaning, layers of mockery and accusation that the British couldn't decode, but that every local person understood perfectly. One song went like this: "Our mother who is in the ground, the warrant chiefs have killed us. We are dying. All we ask is justice." Another was more direct: "The white man says we are fools. He thinks we cannot think. But we have counted our cowries. We know when we are being robbed." Captain Cook finally ordered his men to disperse the crowds. They tried. The police moved in with batons. The women didn't run. They stood their ground, linking arms, creating human chains that the officers couldn't break without committing violence that even they found uncomfortable. Because these weren't warriors. These weren't men with spears. These were mothers, grandmothers, daughters. Many were carrying babies on their backs while they protested. How do you beat a woman holding an infant? How do you justify that to London? The British were trapped in a nightmare of optics and culture. Every move they made looked worse than the last, and the women knew it. They pressed their advantage. December 14th, 1929, Umuahia Native Court. District Officer James Hill is barricaded inside his office. Outside, the sound is deafening. Thousands of voices, drums, the rhythmic stamping of feet that shakes the wooden floor beneath him. He peers through the window slats. What he sees defies everything in his colonial training manual. Women everywhere, young and old, some in traditional wrappers, others in simple cotton dresses. They are dancing in circles around the courthouse, moving with precision that suggests this isn't spontaneous chaos. This is choreographed resistance. And then he sees something that makes his blood run cold. The older women at the front are beginning to undress. Hill's interpreter, a local man named Okoro, stands beside him, his face grave. "Sir, you need to leave now." "I'm not running from a mob of—" "They are not a mob." Okoro's voice is urgent. "This is Ikporo Egu, sitting on a man. If they finish the ritual, you'll be ruined. Not just here, your name, your family." "That's superstitious nonsense." "Is it?" Okoro gestures to the window. "Then why don't you go out there and tell them to stop?" Hill can't. He knows he can't. Because somewhere in his gut, beneath all his British superiority and colonial confidence, he understands that he's watching something far older and more powerful than his empire's rule. The women outside aren't just protesting. They are performing a ceremony of social execution. Let me show you how it worked, because this is the part of history that textbooks skip over. This is the part that makes the Aba Women's War truly extraordinary. When Igbo women decided to sit on a man, they would gather at his home or place of authority. The process had stages, each one escalating in intensity. Stage 1, the summons. They would arrive at dawn, sometimes hundreds of them, and begin singing his misdeeds. Not shouting, singing. Every corrupt act, every abuse of power, every betrayal, transformed into verse and melody. The songs would spread through the community, ensuring everyone knew his shame. Stage 2, the siege. If he didn't emerge to answer their grievances, they would surround his compound. No one in, no one out. They would cook food right there, sleep in shifts, maintain the blockade for days if necessary. They would bang on his walls with pestles used for pounding yams, the same tools that fed families, now weaponized into drums of judgment. Stage 3, the mockery. They would perform satiric dances mocking his masculinity, his leadership, his worth. They would mime his failures, exaggerate his weaknesses, turn him into a living joke that would be remembered for generations. Stage 4, the ultimate curse. If he still refused to submit, if he still clung to his corrupt power, the married women would strip naked. This wasn't sexual. It wasn't about titillation or shock value in the Western sense. In Igbo cosmology, a married woman's naked body held spiritual power. For her to expose herself to a man who wasn't her husband was to call down ancestral wrath, to mark him as cursed, to make him untouchable in the community. The British didn't understand any of this. They saw it as primitive behavior, as evidence of African backwardness. They completely missed that they were watching one of the most sophisticated forms of non-violent resistance ever developed. Because here's the genius. The women were using the colonizers' own supposed civilized values against them. The British Empire claimed to be bringing civilization, Christianity, and proper British morals to Africa. They constantly criticized African practices as savage and uncivilized. But now, when confronted with naked women, they couldn't shoot, they couldn't beat them, they couldn't even look at them without violating their own Victorian sensibilities. The very modesty and propriety they'd tried to impose on African societies became their prison. The women had found the empire's weakness, its hypocrisy. At Umuahia, District Officer Hill finally emerged from his office, flanked by 6 Nigerian police officers. He'd made the calculation that showing force might disperse the crowd. He was catastrophically wrong. The moment he appeared, the women surged forward. Not attacking, they carried no weapons, but pressing in, surrounding him, singing directly into his face. The police officers looked to him for orders, but what could he say? Shoot these unarmed mothers? One of the elderly women, a trader named Nugo, stepped forward. She was maybe 60 years old, her face lined with decades of sun and struggle. She looked Hill directly in the eye and began to speak. Okoro translated, though his voice shook. "You came to our land and told us you brought civilization. You said our ways were darkness. But who is the thief? Who takes food from children's mouths? Your chiefs, your laws, your courts. We built these markets before your ships ever touched our shores. We fed our families. We governed ourselves. Then you came with your peppers and your guns and your promises. And now our children go hungry while your chiefs grow fat." She paused, then said something that Okoro hesitated to translate. "Tell him," Nugo commanded. She says that her nakedness is a mirror, that when they strip, you will see the truth of what you've done, that you will see how you've shamed us, stripped us of dignity, exposed us to poverty, and that shame, that curse, will follow you back to England. Hill's hand moved to his pistol, just rested there. He didn't draw it, but the gesture was enough. The women saw it. They began to sing louder, their voices rising in pitch and power. Some of the younger women started the undressing ritual, unwrapping their cloth coverings, preparing for the final stage. Hill turned and fled back into the courthouse. The women had won that round, but the British Empire didn't stay defeated for long. December 16, 1929, Opobo Town, Rivers Province. The sun rises over a scene that looks more like a festival than a rebellion. More than 15,000 women have gathered at the town square. They are wearing their finest wrappers, bright reds, deep indigos, patterns that catch the morning light. Some have painted their faces with white chalk, a traditional sign of spiritual power and determination. They are not here to negotiate anymore. They are here to dismantle. The target, the native court building, symbol of British authority and local corruption. Inside, terrified court clerks have barricaded the doors. Outside, the women are singing a new song, one that's spreading across the entire region. We are the ones who bet the land. We are the ones who feed you. Without us, you would die. So hear us now or lose everything. Leading them is a woman named Nwanedia. She's a market leader from a nearby village, maybe 40 years old, with a voice that carries across crowds like a bell. She's been organizing women for weeks now, coordinating between villages, ensuring the protests stay disciplined, focused, effective. She raises her hand. The singing stops. In the sudden silence, she addresses the district officer watching from a colonial police post across the square. Her voice is loud enough that everyone can hear. "We are not leaving. We will stay here until the warrant chiefs are removed, until our markets are returned to us, until you stop treating us like children who cannot think. We have been patient. We have been peaceful, but our patience is not weakness, it is strategy." Inside the police post, District Officer Philip Whiteman is losing his mind. He sent telegrams to his superiors in Port Harcourt, to the provincial headquarters, even to Lagos. The responses have been useless. Maintain order, disperse the crowds, use minimum necessary force. What does that even mean when you're facing 15,000 women who won't disperse? Whiteman's problem is the same problem every British officer faces in this uprising. The Empire's playbook doesn't have a chapter for this. They know how to fight armies. They know how to suppress armed rebellions. They know how to execute rebels and burn villages and make examples that terrify populations into submission. But these women aren't rebelling in a way the Empire can legally or morally combat. They are not attacking British citizens. They are not destroying private property, only government buildings, and even then selectively. They are not killing anyone. They are just there, thousands of them, immovable, unignorable, growing in numbers every single day. But Whiteman has decided he's had enough. He's called in reinforcements, 30 Nigerian police officers armed with rifles. He's drawn a line in his mind. If the women try to destroy the native court, he'll stop them with force if necessary. At 10 a.m., the women begin to move toward the courthouse. They are not charging, they are walking slowly, deliberately, still singing. They are carrying sticks, not weapons, but the pistols they use for pounding yams, transformed into symbols of their domestic power turned political. Whiteman steps out of the police post. He's wearing his full colonial uniform, white jacket, khaki shorts, polished boots. He holds up his hand. "That's far enough. This is your final warning. Disperse immediately or we will open fire." The women don't stop. They don't even slow down. Nwanedia at the front calls back. "You want to shoot us for singing? For walking? Then shoot. Show the world what British civilization looks like." She knows what she's doing. She's calling his bluff. Because if he shoots, if he kills unarmed women in broad daylight, the political cost will be catastrophic. The newspapers in London will have a field day. The anti-colonial movements across Africa and India will use it as propaganda. His career will be over. But Whiteman isn't thinking about his career anymore. He's thinking about control, about authority, about the fact that if these women succeed here, every colony in the empire will learn that you can defeat the British by simply refusing to be afraid. He gives the order, "Fix bayonets." The police officers look at each other. Some hesitate. These are local men, Nigerians themselves, and many of them have wives, sisters, mothers in crowds just like this one. But they are also men who've taken British wages, worn British uniforms, enforced British rule. They are trapped between two worlds, and today they have to choose which one they belong to. Slowly, they attach bayonets to their rifles. The women keep walking. They are 50 yards away now. 40, 30. Whiteman's voice breaks. "Fire! Fire at will!" The rifles crack, not warning shots into the air this time, bullets into the crowd. The first woman to fall is named Iconia, not the same Iconia who helped Nwanerua send out the palm fronds, but another woman who shares that common name. She's hit in the chest. She drops to the Red Death, her bright yellow wrapper blooming with blood. For 3 seconds, the world holds its breath. Then the women charge, not away, toward the guns. It's the most terrifying thing the British officers will ever witness. These women and soldiers, they haven't been trained for combat, but they've made a collective decision that death is preferable to continued submission. That if the empire wants to rule them, it will have to kill every single one of them. The police keep firing, women fall, 10, 20, 30, but the crowd doesn't break. They overwhelm the police line through sheer numbers, disarming officers, destroying the courthouse, tearing down the British flag and trampling it into the dust. By the time it's over, 55 women are dead or dying. More than 50 others are wounded. But the native court at Opobo is destroyed. The records are burned. The symbol of British authority is reduced to smoking rubble. And across southeastern Nigeria, in every village where women receive news of the massacre, the response isn't fear, it's fury. The British thought violence would end the uprising. Instead, they'd just guaranteed it would spread like wildfire. Because now it wasn't just about taxes or corrupt chiefs anymore. Now it was about something far more dangerous to an empire. It was about justice. It was about dignity. It was about showing that African women will rather die standing than live kneeling. The empire had made a fatal miscalculation. They'd revealed that beneath all their talk of civilization and progress and bringing light to dark places, they were just men with guns willing to murder unarmed women to maintain power. And once that mask falls off, it never goes back on. December 18, 1929. Colonial Office, Lagos. The telegram sits on Governor Hugh Clifford's desk like a live grenade. 55 women killed. Opobo situation critical. Uprising spreading. Request immediate reinforcements. Clifford is 64 years old, a veteran of colonial administration across Asia and Africa. He's seen rebellions before. He's crushed them before. But as he reads the reports flowing in from southeastern Nigeria, he realizes this is different. This isn't something you can crush. His secretary enters with more telegrams. From London, from the Colonial Secretary, from members of Parliament who've read the early newspaper reports and are asking very pointed questions about why British officers are massacring unarmed women. One telegram is from a women's rights organization in London. Explain immediately why empire shoots mothers for protesting taxation. Clifford crumples it in his fist. How do you explain this? How do you tell the world that you lost control of an entire province because women decided they'd had enough? But here's what's happening on the ground, what Clifford's telegrams can't fully capture. The Opobo massacre hasn't terrified the women into submission. It's radicalized an entire generation. In villages across Owerri, Calabar and Aba provinces, women are gathering in larger numbers than ever before. They are not just targeting native courts anymore. They are going after every symbol of colonial authority, trading posts, police stations, anywhere a warrant chief might hide. At Aba, 3,000 women storm the native court and release all the prisoners. When the district officer tries to stop them, they strip naked in mass, creating a wall of bodies and spiritual power that the British literally cannot look at without violating their own cultural taboos. At Ikotekpene, women don't just destroy the courthouse, they systematically hunt down the warrant chief who'd been taking bribes from market women for years. When they find him hiding in a European merchant store, they drag him into the street and perform the full sitting on a man ritual. For 3 days, they surround his compound, singing his crimes, mocking his manhood, ensuring every person in the region knows his shame. He flees to Lagos and never returns. At Owerri, the women present a list of demands directly to the British officials. Remove all warrant chiefs who have oppressed us. Return control of the markets to women's councils. No taxation of women under any circumstances. Representation of women in any court or council that affects our lives. Punishment for the officers who ordered the killing at Opobo. The British are shocked by how organized this is. These aren't random protests. This is coordinated political action across hundreds of villages, involving an estimated 40,000 women. And here's what makes it truly unprecedented. The women are winning. Not in the way armies win, with territory captured and enemies killed. They are winning by making the colony ungovernable. Every native court in the region has either been destroyed or abandoned. The warrant chiefs, the puppet rulers the British depended on, have fled or gone into hiding. Tax collection has completely stopped. The administrative machinery of the empire has simply ceased to function. Governor Clifford makes the calculation. He can send more troops. He can order more shootings. He can try to terrorize the population back into submission. But at what cost? Already, newspapers in London, New York, and Paris are running headlines: British troops fire on unarmed women in Nigeria. Anti-colonial activists in India and across Africa are using Opobo as proof that the empire's civilizing mission is a lie. Even some British politicians are asking uncomfortable questions about whether the empire can justify ruling people who so clearly don't want to be ruled. The math is brutal. Either double down on violence and risk turning southeastern Nigeria into a bloodbath that destroys Britain's international reputation, or give the women what they want. On January 9, 1930, Governor Clifford issues a series of orders that shock the colonial establishment. The warrant chief system in southeastern Nigeria is suspended pending review. Women will be exempt from direct taxation. A commission will investigate the conduct of colonial officers during the uprising. Women's market councils will be recognized as legitimate governing bodies. It's not everything the women demanded. The British officers who ordered the killings face no real punishment. They are quietly transferred to other postings. The empire doesn't formally apologize. They frame it as administrative reforms rather than admitting defeat. But everyone knows the truth. A group of unarmed women, using nothing but their voices, their bodies, and their refusal to accept oppression, forced the British Empire to back down. Let me be clear about what this means. In 1929, the British Empire controlled roughly 25% of the world's land surface and 25% of its population.
They had the world's most powerful navy, a professional army with modern weapons, and centuries of experience crushing rebellions. And they lost to women, carrying yam pestles and singing protest songs. The Aba Women's War, as it came to be known, sent shockwaves through every British colony. In India, women's organizations studied the tactics. In Kenya, anti-colonial movements took note. In the Caribbean, activists saw proof that non-violent resistance could work. But the impact was deepest in Nigeria itself. The women who led the uprising didn't just win policy changes. They won something more valuable. They proved that African women were political actors with power, intelligence, and the capacity to organize sophisticated resistance. They shattered the colonial myth that Africans, and especially African women, were passive subjects waiting to be governed. After 1929, no British administrator in Nigeria could ignore women's voices. Market women's associations became power brokers. When Nigeria eventually gained independence in 1960, women's political organizations were at the forefront, and many traced their lineage directly back to the women of 1929. Nwanyeruwa, the widow whose refusal to be counted started everything, lived to see Nigerian independence. She was in her 80s by then, and when asked about that day in November 1929 when Emeruwa grabbed her throat, she reportedly smiled and said, "He thought I was alone. He didn't know that when you touch one of us, you touch all of us. That was his mistake. That was their mistake. They thought we were weak because we were women. They didn't understand that we were strong because we were women."
Today, if you visit southeastern Nigeria, you won't find many monuments to the Aba Women's War. There's no grand monument in Opobo where 55 women bled into the red earth. No statue of Nwanyeruwa in Oloko. No museum dedicated to Nwandidia and the thousands who marched with her. The British made sure of that. After the uprising, they tried to erase it from history. Colonial reports downplayed the women's organization and intelligence, describing them as hysterical mobs who didn't understand what they were doing. They called it the Aba riots, not war, as if these women were mindless and chaotic rather than brilliant and strategic. But history has a way of refusing to stay buried. Because what those women did in 1929 didn't just change colonial policy, it changed what was possible. Think about what they achieved. They organized across ethnic lines. Igbo, Ibibio, Ogoni, and other groups who'd historically had tensions came together under women's leadership. They coordinated protests across hundreds of villages without phones, without internet, without any modern communication technology. They maintained discipline even under fire, literally as bullets tore through their ranks at Opobo. They created a blueprint for resistance that echoed forward through history. In the 1950s, when Nigerian women organized to demand political representation in the independence movement, they used tactics learned from 1929. In the 1970s and 80s, when market women across Africa protested structural adjustment programs imposed by the IMF and World Bank, they drew inspiration from Nwanyeruwa's generation. And today Today, when you see women organizing across Africa, fighting against corruption, demanding inclusion in peace negotiations, building economic cooperatives, standing up to authoritarian governments, you're seeing the daughters and granddaughters of that legacy. But let's talk about what this story really means beyond the tactics and the politics. The Aba Women's War is about something fundamental. It's about who gets to write history and whose power gets recognized. For centuries, the story of Africa has been told by outsiders, colonizers who painted themselves as civilizers, explorers who called themselves discoverers of lands that had been inhabited for millennia, historians who wrote books about African tribes as if they were studying animals rather than sophisticated societies with their own systems of governance, economics, and justice. The women of 1929 rejected that narrative with every fiber of their being. They said, "We are not primitive. We are not passive. We are not waiting for you to save us or civilize us. We have our own systems, our own power, our own intelligence, and we will not be erased." That's what sitting on a man really was. It was a refusal to let colonizers define the terms of engagement. The British brought guns and laws and bureaucracy. The women brought culture, community, and spiritual power. The British expected a fight they could win with violence. The women gave them a challenge that violence couldn't solve. And when the empire finally opened fire at Opobo, when they showed that beneath all their talk of civilization was just brutality and fear, the women didn't break. They charged the guns. They chose death over submission. They forced the empire to reveal its true face to the world. That takes a kind of courage that most of us will never have to summon. These weren't professional revolutionaries. They were mothers and traders and grandmothers. They had children to feed, businesses to run, lives to live. But they looked at the empire that was crushing them and said, "No more, not today, not ever." And they won. Not perfectly, not completely. The British didn't leave Nigeria for another 30 years. Many of the women who marched in 1929 didn't live to see independence. The Opobo martyrs never got justice. Their killers were never prosecuted. Their names are barely remembered. But they changed the equation. They proved that resistance was possible. They showed that African women had power that couldn't be taken away even at gunpoint. They planted seeds that would grow into the independence movement, into women's rights movements, into a fundamental reimagining of what African politics and society could look like. There's a lesson in this for all of us, wherever we are in the world. The most powerful weapon against oppression isn't always violence. Sometimes it's simply refusing to accept the story that oppressors tell about you. It's organizing with your community. It's using your culture, the songs, the rituals, the knowledge passed down from grandmothers as tools of resistance. It's understanding that power comes in many forms. And sometimes the power that looks weakest, the power of women dismissed as just housewives, just market traders, is actually the power that holds everything together. The British learned that lesson the hard way in 1929. They learned that you can occupy a land, but you can't control it if the people who actually make the society function, the ones who grow the food and sell it in markets and raise the next generation, decide to stop cooperating.
That's the genius of the Aba Women's War. It wasn't about matching the empire's violence. It was about withdrawing the consent that the empire needed to function. It was about showing that power ultimately rests not with those who have the biggest guns, but with those who do the essential work of keeping communities alive. So, when you hear stories about great men in history, kings and generals and presidents, remember Nwanyeruwa, remember Nwandidia, remember Ikonia, and the 55 women whose names we don't even know who died at Opobo. Remember the thousands of others who marched and sang and stripped naked, and refused to be silent. Remember that sometimes the most important history is the history that powerful people tried to erase. Sometimes the real heroes are the ones who didn't get statues or monuments or their faces on currency. Sometimes the people who changed the world were just regular people who decided they'd had enough and found extraordinary courage in community and culture and collective action. That's the legacy of the Aba Women's War. That's what rises when nations rise. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Drop a comment telling us what you think. Did you know about the Aba Women's War before today? What other untold African stories do you want to hear? And listen, we need your support. This channel exists to tell the stories that textbooks ignore, to reclaim the narratives that colonizers tried to bury, to show the world that African history is full of brilliance, courage, and triumph. But we can only keep making this content if you're with us. So, subscribe, hit that notification bell, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Read the full deep dive article in the description below. We've got sources, photographs, and even more details about the women who made this happen. This is Rise of African Nations. We are rewriting history one story at a time, and we can't do it without you. See you in the next one. A luta continua, the struggle continua.